Business now with Charles Pellegrin. He's focusing on the story of a bridge that's becoming yet another obstacle in the US-Canada relationship. What's this about?
The Gordie Howe International Bridge, named after a Canadian ice hockey legend who played across the border for the Detroit Red Wings. And that was supposed to be a symbol of the friendship between the two countries, but U.S. President Donald Trump sees it as something else entirely. On Monday, he posted what could only be qualified as a tirade on his social media platform, Truth Social, in which he concluded that he will not allow the bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated for everything the U.S. has given to Canada, his words, and until the U.S. is treated with the fairness and respect it deserves, and then immediately calling for negotiations on the matter. His main points of contention were that Canada owns land on both sides of that bridge and that it virtually uses no U.S. materials and that the U.S. won't get anything from the development, meaning won't collect toll revenues.
Most importantly, are they fair accusations, Charles?
Not really. Let's look over the main facts on this new bridge that connects the province of Ontario with the state of Michigan. The project has been in the works for a while, and construction started in 2018 with an expected opening date early this year, once all the necessary safety tests are conducted. That construction was funded and operated by a Canadian Crown corporation called the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority, named after the two cities it connects. That's basically a government-owned company. It spent an estimated $6.4 billion Canadian dollars on the project. That's about 4 billion euros. And that corporation did buy land on both sides of the bridge, but fundamentally the structure is co-owned by the government of Canada and the U.S. state of Michigan. Canada will collect the toll revenue to pay for the construction costs. Once that's been recouped, well, revenues will be split equally. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke to Donald Trump on the phone on Tuesday. He described that conversation as positive. And he told Trump that U.S. and Canadian workers actually both contributed to the project and that U.S. steel was also used. All in all, the project is supported by people on both sides of the border as being good for the local economies of Ontario and Michigan. Take a listen to the mayor of Windsor speaking to a CBC reporter.
Under normal times, building a span that links two nations like the United States and Canada would be a monumental moment where a prime minister would meet a president in the middle, they would shake hands, and they would celebrate this victory for two nations. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has created an environment where I don't think that is going to happen in the near term.
So could there be other motives then for Donald Trump's threats?
First off, this comes within a wider context of trade tensions between Washington and Ottawa, and even calls by Trump to turn Canada into a 51st state. President Trump has imposed tariffs on Canadian goods. Discussions on this issue are at a standstill right now, and coming up is also a renegotiation of the Continental Trade Pact known as the US-Canada-Mexico Agreement. So this specific bridge negotiation could be seen as an additional pressure tactic from Washington in order to gain concessions. But there's also another aspect here. The Gordie Howe Bridge is just a few kilometers away from another existing cross-border bridge over the Detroit River, the Ambassador Bridge. And that bridge is entirely owned and operated by the American Maroon family, which has consistently appealed against the construction of a new project that could rival what is currently the busiest crossing in the area. U.S. media has reported that Matthew Maroon, a prolific donor to Trump's campaigns, held a meeting with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on Monday to discuss this bridge issue, and that Lutnick then called Trump after the meeting and before the U.S. president made his Truth Social post.
Argentina now for this next story. Inflation has once again come in higher than expected, nearly 3% on a monthly basis there.
And that's despite President Javier Milei's efforts to bring it under control via a shock program of slashing government spending. But that's only half the story. Milei's government is measuring inflation using a 2-decade-old price index, despite growing calls to update it. Critics say the outdated basket of consumer goods fails to take stock of the real expenses facing present-day Argentinians. Brian Quinn has a story.
On the streets of Buenos Aires, the news was unwelcome but unsurprising for struggling Argentinians, as the country's official inflation rate came in higher than expected for the 5th straight month.
Since this government has been in power, all the prices have increased a lot. That means profit for the people who own the companies and a loss of purchasing power for the rest of us.
According to Argentina's statistics agency INDEC, January's consumer prices were up 2.9% compared to the previous month. Those figures are a blow to President Javier Milei, a self-described radical libertarian who came to power promising to rein in runaway inflation. And the latest data likely understates the problem. The basket of consumer goods INDEC uses to calculate official inflation dates from 2004 and is widely considered a relic of its era. It includes cigarettes, physical newspapers and DVDs, and landline telephone bills, leaving out more pertinent expenses like digital subscriptions and mobile devices. It also fails to fully account for skyrocketing costs of services like public transport, healthcare, and electricity, as Milei's program of slashing government spending eliminates once generous subsidies. Under mounting pressure, Milei's administration had said it would be updating the index for this month's reading, but reversed course just last week. Analysts have called it an unnecessary error.
At a time when they need to regain trust, it's a step backwards. They prefer to continue with the old index, despite the consequences this could have.
Milei is far from the first Argentine leader to lean on wishful inflation statistics, but calls are growing for more transparency in how the country's economic health is measured.
One Kim reporting there, thanks to Sean Pellegrin, our business editor.